The motivation of this webinar was presented is about the alignment of the expectation on the usage of the identifiers. We have a very fruitful webinar the 10th of March, where some decisions were, some options were proposed, some preliminary decisions were made on this topic. During this the current webinar, we would like to continue our discussion and, if possible, come to more firm decisions on this topic. My colleagues Max and Berta will present you, will have a short introduction of what was decided during the previous webinar and what are the issues that we would like to discuss today. And I pass the floor to Berta Noflin to start elaborating this. Bert?
Okay, thank you, Pavlina.
We cannot hear you, Bert.
This will be better, I hope. Let's go back.
Now we can hear you, yes.
Yeah, well, in short, what we will do is a short recap of the state of play of the introduction of last time, because maybe some people were not available, present during that webinar, so that everybody starts at the same knowledge a bit without going in the long elaborated introduction that we had last time. And then we will present our proposal, but we will, based on our discussions of last time, of course, but we will present it a little bit different in a different order and topic by topic. We'll come in detail to do this proposal later on. And then, of course, we conclude and wrap up and to see what are the next steps was this outcome of our discussion. In short, what was the state of play? What we discussed last time was that we highlighted that on identifiers, there are lots of design principles, and often those design principles are around the following concepts: responsibility, to some extent, identifiers aid to identify the responsible person, organization for that entity. That as well has typically concerns around persistency, so that you can transfer, that you have this identifier alive for a long time beyond systems and software lifetime, but that the data is connected to the lifetime of the entity itself. And that in some way, the concern is that you can use identifiers to find back the original information, the core information of that entity you're describing. Now,
Bert?
We cannot hear you now.
Bert, we cannot hear you.
Bert, we cannot hear you.
But we can see.
We can see the subtitling.
Yes, the subtitling.
Bert, we cannot hear you.
Stop, stop, stop.
We cannot hear you.
We cannot hear you, Bert.
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Now we can hear you.
What's strange is something. And do you wait?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Share content again. Microsoft. Sharing. Okay. My apologies. I don't know where. Do you see the screen this?
Yeah, you can just, and we hear you and can see your screen.
Okay, and
you'd have to go back one slide.
Okay, on the identifiers, here you're lost already.
No. Well, I think we saw this one. So you can
You
go
saw this one, this one. Okay, good. On this, so on the use case of identifiers, just to recap on here, we highlighted that identifiers are useful for processing, highlighted that it is useful for networking, so to interrelate data sets with each other across data portals. We highlighted that these identifiers are useful for portal development, so that you can build up your portal and to integrate and to show and to discuss and to present that to people. And that you finally as well highlight, and this is our special case of processing, is harvesting, that we can share the same data set across our network and propagate this to our catalog network. And we will see in our proposal what harvesting does and what the influence has on our proposal on handling identifiers. There is already existing work, and what we just want to highlight here is that there are existing guidelines, but they are not sufficient to address all the needs and the expectations that were expressed and the challenges that are expressed in before. So we want to strengthen this, and this is the reason why we are discussing. And as you know, in DCAT-AP, if you know the specification, then there are two properties, DCT identifier and ADMS identifier, and based on those two properties, we will make a proposal and discuss with you the proposal. Last time we already discussed on some perspective on DCT identifier, and that triggered a lot of discussions. And what we wanted to highlight is that in this presentation, that the goal of the guidelines are to support the data AP community as a whole. And we want to strengthen the catalog network, meaning that it should be possible to get better harvesting behavior, better sharing of information, while at the same time keeping the catalogs as independent of each other, so that we don't impose rules on the whole network, that it's in such a way that they are create dependencies between the catalogs. And the goal is, of course, that this is catalog implementable solutions and easy to implement. A full written out proposal is already available. You find the link here. Alexander can share it in the chat as well if you want to read it. So this is the proposal that is written out and that we will going to discuss. What we'll do is we will introduce in a bit of a block by block way the topics and then have an open discussion on the whole section of that proposal. We will not do like previous time small individual changes, but make a more block, a coherent story, and then having a discussion with you all on that block, on that part of the proposal. Because we felt that this would be more beneficial for the discussion today. What is our flow? You see it on the titles as well. That's the first goal of our ambition of this guideline, is that we want to improve the sharing of metadata on identifiers. So this is the cornerstone of our proposal. And here we focus on the property ADMS Identifier. We will illustrate that proposal with some example scenarios, individually what it means, the proposal for a single catalog, and then as well towards what happens in harvesting on the catalog network. And then we move to the discussion where we started last time with on the main identifier or DCT identifier in particular, and how to fit that into the story of sharing more metadata of identifiers. And then we move on to the Rdf Format Guidelines. So as a consequence of the two above discussions, you can look then to more detailed if you share the data as RDF and what happens over there and what are the guidelines and what the impact might be and to strengthen that. And finally, we want to have a discussion on which entities we would like to apply these guidelines. So in all the examples and all the story, I will use only data sets, but think in the end on which entities you might apply the same idea, the same approach, and so on. So this is, I'm not going to discuss on every point, and it can be applied for these classes. That's something at the end. Okay, on the implementation on our proposal, that's just to already give some heads up. What we see is that the first part on the proposal on sharing metadata on ADMS Identifier, that we see that there's an immediate benefit, and that we suggest is to take this as an adoption already in the bug fix release. Whereas the discussion of the proposal on DCT Identifier is a rule, the proposal there is much more strict, has actually a semantic change. And our proposal is to take this more on a slower pace, and it can be, it's probably not in contradiction in the minor release. But that can be discussed at the right point in time.
Maybe also say, Bert, that these are not either or proposals. They're both proposals are equally valid, and we propose to implement them both.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'll do now is introduce you the proposal on sharing more metadata on identifiers, and that is the first topic that we're going to have a discussion upon, and we'll take our time on that. Our proposal is, in short, use ADMS identifier to describe metadata about identifiers, about all your identifiers. So not only as the label already today in DCAT-AP suggests the other identifiers, but we want to enlarge it and to apply it to all identifiers. And why we want to do that is because DCT identifier, if you just look to DCT identifier, it's just a literal without any context or ownership. You don't know from where this identifier comes, you just get the value. And ADMS identifier actually provides us a mean to express this context, to express this ownership, the reason, the origin, and additional information about this identifier. And in this way, if we are going to share this across our network, then this can become a larger list, a larger collection of identifiers associated with the same data set. So as you see illustrated at the bottom, for if we have D1 as a data set being having as DCT identifier D1, then we would like that everybody would add ADMS identifier with the same value, its cost notation, and a context. In this case, DCT creator of the publisher that you want that has been publishing this identifier. If we look in concreto to the proposal in the tables, so what would change is that we have still the property ADMS identifier, but in order to make it highlighting more that it is about identifiers and all identifiers, to drop the word other in the property label, just keep identifier. The range is still the same, ADMS identifier class, so a range of descriptions of identifiers. We still maintain the cardinality 0 to n, although you could argue that in the end there will be always at least one. That will be probably the case. On the definition side, more towards that is describing, so described identifier of the dataset, and on the usage note, that each identifier that you create or that comes into the process of the catalog or assignment by the publisher or somebody else, that is being included to the list, to the collection of ADMS identifier. So that you see that this property is not referring anymore to the secondary identifier, but to the described identifier. So this is the change.
Questions from Andrea?
Yeah, thanks, Max. So, Bert, now just a question about the change in the note, because it's not clear to me which is the new definition there. This property, and then what?
Sorry, Andrea. This property. So what the goal
of this? The new usage note, because this is from what is written here is clear what has been changed.
Okay, at the bottom in the current specification, you see that the usage note says this property refers to the secondary identifier of the dataset. That's the single statement that you find in the specification. So what's a bit ahead of splitting between definition and usage nodes, definition to the described identifier, so to a broad definition of ADMS identifier, whereas the usage node in our case for DCAT-AP refers to any identifier that we encounter throughout the processing that you should include. That's the goal of the usage node that I want to highlight here. So this coverage aspect.
No, I understand, but just want to know which is exactly the text of the revised usage note.
Both. We would like to go in the end to something which has a definition and a usage node, in similar like the core vocabularies.
Yes.
But I think that Andrea just wants to know what the exact text is.
It is the blue, what you see in the blue.
It used to be this property refers to, and the new usage node doesn't say that. So maybe it should say this property refers to each identifier that a catalog or a process assigns.
Yeah.
Is that what you were looking at, Andrea?
Yeah, it's a bit unclear to me in any case about the definition, because I mean, a DMS identifier is just the identifier. So I don't know why it should be written described identifier for the data set. And why if we are using it for a data service, for instance?
But for the data, that's why I mentioned for every class, you could say for the data service, for the agent. That's a topic that we see later on. So the scoping here is within a data set at the moment. Just for the...
Okay. No, I'm just wondering why it cannot just be said identifier and that's it. Why describe the identifier? But okay, I'll wait for the explanation.
Alberto?
Yes, I don't know. Are you going to talk about uniqueness and how this identifier will be built? Nextly.
Actually, here it is not about uniqueness nor about persistency. It's about recording the origin of the identifier.
Whatever the identifier is.
So if you have the origin, you somehow will have some kind of grammar for building the identifier, isn't it?
We don't say that. We just leave that to the creator of the identifier, and we allow all identifiers, but what we propose is that there is metadata for that identifier.
Okay, you will elaborate on that.
Yeah, that's the next slide on what is the kind of metadata that's currently available. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so just to complete on it, on the proposal is that on the range, so because the range of this property of ADMS identifier with a lowercase is a class ADMS identifier with a capital case, there is minimally the notation that's already available, but that's not making our differentiating from DCT identifier. So our goal is minimally to add at least the owner or the creator or the maintainer of that schema, how it's called in ADMS, to add that information. Why is that important? Because that will aid us and the whole catalog network to differentiate from the same notation that might occur in different schemas. And that might as well give you the ability to select on the preference or say, okay, look, this is a DOI. I know this schema is from DOI. I have more trust in this schema. So this is the goal of why we want the schema manager as included. You see here a cardinality, both on the name and on the agent as it is in ADMS defined. One is a literal property, one is a object property. This can be, the idea, the cardinality is minimal, one of them should be implemented. But it's open to the working group if we enforce both, or we enforce only one of them, or we enforce that the union of them should be at least one. So this is open for discussion. But minimally, at least some additional information should be given.
I see a question from, comment from Ludger that 1.1 seems to be too strict. And because that would take a long time to implement. But I think that's a part of the implementation period. But I think what Bert just said is that if we want to have metadata, then this should be provided.
Yeah, because otherwise, if at least on the schema manager name or the schema manager agent is the minimal additional information that distinguishes ADMS identifier from DCT identifier. If you don't provide it, there's no difference into it. So the goal is to differentiate and to provide more information.
And then Sander remarks that he is uncomfortable with adding stuff to the data that is federated. I would prefer to keep the record intact and attach everything that is added along the way external to the entity itself. Can you explain that, Sander? What do you mean by the record? Sander, can you talk? Okay, no, so that we'll take that into account. Yeah.
Okay.
So then we'll move on.
We'll move on.
Note this one. We'll note this one.
Okay. So what is? So we have in ADMS. If you look to ADMS specification, you have this agent or the name of the agent that is maintaining or originating the originator of this identifier value. We could additionally consider additional components. So this is a question, an open question. If ADMS identifier as it is with this agent is sufficient, or we would like to add additional elements to it, and what are those kind of additional elements to it? You see, for instance, here a suggestion on the right bottom corner where we could say, look, there's a namespace and a local identifier. Splitting that might be useful and might be helpful for instance, data portal UI design. So because maybe there are some queries to be built only on the local identifier, then this is already in the metadata available, and that can aid and speed up the interaction of the services. And this might be as a component being shared across the catalog network. So is there any expectation or requirements that people see and say, okay, this is valuable to discuss on what are additional components on ADMS identifier? That one, and that's finally to complete, and then we open the discussion. So to remind you, the goal is to have all identifiers included. That means as well that the value of DCT identifier should be included, and the RDF URI should be included, so that we have a complete picture of all the identifiers that are being associated with the dataset. And the same thing if there's a need that a catalog, and in this case it's suggested the aggregator, needs to create new identifier for its portal, its use services, then as well to share those as ADMS identifier, so that this is propagated to the network, and that this can be used to disambiguate later on. That is the proposal. So, yeah.
Matthias has a question why we need all this complexity. Matthias?
Okay, I have a cold, so I'm not sure if my voice carries. But I'm sort of leaning towards that we can use the URIs of the dataset. We already use the URIs of the dataset when we refer between datasets in the relation, is version of, related resource. All of these properties we already have has part. So there is a well-established mechanism of referring to datasets. Yeah, and this provides, if the person who is minting a dataset mints the URI, the URI will contain the owner of the dataset will have the host name corresponding to their organization. So that's about the ownership.
That's not always the case. You know that.
Well, in that case, you can.
It could be. It should be. But it's not the case, and I think what we have, if Bert, correct me if I'm wrong, what we do here is we have the proposal to make it clear what these identifiers are, even in the case that what you say is this, let's say, ideal situation doesn't exist, and we know that the ideal situation doesn't exist. Sander also makes the comment here, because people do change the identifier data during federation, which you could argue is the wrong way to do it, but that's actually the situation that we're in. So we propose to add this so that you actually know absolutely for certain what it is that the identifier represents.
But isn't this something we should argue against instead?
Well,
changing the URI will cause breaking.
Yeah, but it's that happens at the moment. So we're trying to
but
find a way.
Maybe it's better to push in the right direction than to introduce more complexity that will just cause more complexity and more implementation details. How will you use these identifiers? Will you use them to?
That's going. Bert is going to show that in the case, in the use case, in the example. But I have a question from Jesper first.
Okay.
Yeah, I see the need for an additional identifier as proposed here, because as soon as you harvest another catalog, you assign your own, or you have your own URL. You can't use the original URL because that would lead to another catalog. So you have your own URL, and somehow you want to store your own URL, and you also want to store the original URL because you want to have the link to the original data. So I think for that use case, at least for that use case, you need those multiple identifiers.
And that's what Bert is going to show. I have a comment from Case Troutwine. Talks about user interface edition, but I don't think we have talked about that yet, Bert. We were not talking about user interfaces.
You were talking about the UI framework, right? Is that, do I misunderstand that?
Well, so might be, for instance, and this is one of the reasons as well why you want to have sometimes new identifiers. Sorry, is that if you have a UI framework and this UI framework says your identifier to do optimal querying must be integers. Therefore, you have to assign integers to the knowledge that you have inside. And if you start building public identifiers and sharing on this, then you might, then this becomes a part of your information graph or information knowledge, and this just offers you the mean to share this, and that's what we propose, that you can share it, that you can associate, and that you can, on a safe way, can add this to your knowledge base.
Matthias has a name hand on, and Fabian as well. Matthias?
Yeah, I just wrote it in the chat, so
Okay.
I don't see that we necessarily need to introduce new URIs for datasets just because we have another landing page for a dataset in a portal.
Okay. And Fabian?
Yeah, hello, thank you. Yeah, I'm one of the developers of Data Europa, and first maybe to Matthias. We cannot rely on the URLs currently. It's not possible for us because, for one, we have also data providers which give us data sets as a bulk without individual URLs. So we create our own URLs. And so we need another way to refer to the original data sets. And also, like many others, we put everything into one triple store so we can access all data sets in one triple store. So we need to change the URL. It would be better if there would be a way to keep it in a triple store, but it's just not possible because any data provider can just assign any URL. It doesn't need to reflect their host name or domain. It's not enforced, and so URLs in our experience are not persistent. They change. Even for Data Europa, before our persistent URLs were a European data portal, and now they're Data Europa. It changed, but they are the same data sets. So it's our experience that the URL is not sufficient. Although that was the idea of a URL, it's not like this. And that's my first comment. My second is to your proposal here, with that we need to store the original identifiers in Dms Identifier. This is very complicated, and it's, at least for us, currently not possible because, like, who was it here in the chat? Let me check. Sender. Yeah, Sender. We don't change the metadata itself. If we would do that, we need to keep track on the changes, and if we harvest again, we need to merge the changes. But that's very complicated. It's not complicated, but for 1 million data sets, it's too much. So we would like a proposal where we store those things maybe in the record and not in the data set itself, because we consider the DCAT data set class as we don't change it. We just take it, store it, and if we get an update, we store it again. And so I would propose that we discuss this a little bit in more detail. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
So you were saying to put the information in the catalog record and not in the metadata for the dataset.
Yeah, it's not ideal also, but it's the catalog record is it's metadata about the metadata, so it's maybe a better place. I'm not sure. It's always an issue how to store in. It's kind of internal for the federated portal.
And Jesper?
Would it help if we as a data provider are required to add our own identifier as listed here on the slide on the first bullet point? If we have to put our DCT identifier as the ADMS identifier, then you're sure you will find it, and you don't have to edit after harvesting the data.
Yes,
that's the idea.
That's the idea. That's what we hope that publishers are going to do, as close as possible to the publisher, the original creator of that metadata description of the dataset, that this organization is creating as well the ADMS identifier with saying, look, this is in this context, I have created this identifier, and you can be sure that the life cycle of this identifier corresponds to my interpretation of the life cycle of the dataset. That is the objective that we hope that this is pushed towards in the end to the publishers. That's not currently the case. I understand, I hear a lot of concerns of not changing the metadata. Now, this raises the question how you do any enrichment, how you would address any enrichment, because normally I would expect that adding information to saying, look, this is an additional statement, this is an additional identifier to a data set, is not changing the metadata. It doesn't feel for me personally, this is my personal, that this is a dramatic change into the story. It is only attaching somebody's view, this is my identifier I have assigned to this data set. It's not changing anything of the semantics of the data sets itself. So I would like to ask the community if they feel that way, or they feel this as a change of the metadata.
Okay, so I think there are people who have already said that they think no one should actually touch the metadata that is being harvested, and then information that is sort of different identifiers would be kept somewhere else in the catalog record, or even somewhere else. And I think there are people also here who say it's a good idea to add things as you go along. So there is basically two views here.
Because we are just at this one example. We have another similar situation where we add translations to the texts. That's actually the same thing. If you add a machine translation to the system and you publish it, you do not change it. You denote that this is a machine translation best effort that you have done. So this is something similar, in my opinion, just to give.
Alberto has his hands up.
Yes, I'm a bit not lost, but I guess that we are thinking on situations when harvesting is something which is done from time to time. So we are not considering highly updated data sets. When I mean updated on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, or something like that. And what we are saying is like thinking on very static data sets. I don't know if this is the future.
Maybe not the future, but that's currently the situation, I think, where we're in. Are you suggesting that we also later on look at the way that this works, or that we need to provide the tools for continuously changing? I think we have something on the list there for the future.
I guess that the amount of identifiers, let's say, is an open resource, so we can have as much as needed. So with a very simple approach, I guess that we can have trillions of them. So this is not a real issue. And I guess that we can design something that not only solves our current issues, but some of the, I would say, also current issues. And I'm going to tell you some of the examples from my experience. I've been doing a study about the situation on open data across Spain. So we visit all the open data portals, and we are struggling, and is the most costly by far, is to answer this simple question: how many data sets are published in Spain? You can, you have to do it manually. There is around 58,000, because there is no single way that you can identify if a data set is federated or not. So if we don't put something on the identifier, something that really identifies the origin, or we are somehow doomed?
Okay.
Yeah.
So there is quite a lot of discussion taking place on the chat. I can't really follow all of that. We are certainly going to keep that in mind. But I just wanted to ask Bert now to go and do your example, so that maybe that makes it clearer to people what we're proposing.
Okay, good. I'll just is what is to close it down, and that's on this proposal is that if we want to validate it and force it, the shackle validation rules can only check a very simple thing, namely that DCT identifier is part of the ADMS identifier. Maybe if we extend the shackle reasoner sufficiently, then you can check if the URI is a part of the ADMS identifier, but we are unable, and you cannot get this out of the validators if the propagation of the sharing is being done. So this is an aspect that you will not get. On the example scenarios, so I illustrate this. There are many situations you will find in the written out text, many different cases on how in RDF statements identification of a dataset can happen. This is only one case. The advice is in this case, and where you see here a dataset is identified with D1 in the source catalog. When you harvest it, then it's not the advice just only copying, but if the original source catalog has not done it yet, to add a meaning and to say, okay, I have collected this identifier and it came from the source catalog. So that at least at a certain point in time, this tracing starts happening. And then, of course, if you have in this process needs and for creating your own identifiers in your aggregated catalog, that you document them as well. So this is the two levels where the first of the source is hopefully done by the source itself, but if not, advised that harvesters as well take this role and take this action as well. So that's the goal. That's the reason. So if you want to have the local identifiers and so on, this can be helpful that you document, and this can be useful for others to see. This is a typical situation that you have to take in mind and to take the broad perspective, not only your own catalog, but the whole network of catalog. And this is a situation that actually occurs in our practice. We have a source catalog C, and there are two catalogs that harvest the same catalog, AG1 and AG2, and you can think of one is a national portal and the other one is a thematic portal. They both harvest the same source catalog, and both are then harvested by another catalog. And this global one on the right-hand side has no knowledge of the source catalog C anymore. It's not directly connected, it's indirectly connected through the catalogs AG1 and AG2. So what is our expected behavior? That if we have a catalog at a dataset D1 at catalog C, and it's harvested by catalog AG1, that you can, by simple inspection, find D1 back, and the same one find it back in catalog AG2, and that in the global, if you do the harvesting over there, that this leads to D1 over there. And if we then take a broad perspective, and this is what Alberto said, so what are the data sets in Spain in the whole network? Well, the answer is only one in this case. There's only one, but it's presented in 4 different catalogs. That's our expected behavior. That's where we want to drive towards in the end. Now, what is undesired, of course, is that this happens. You have D1 here, and for some reason, it is renamed to D2 in aggregated catalog AG1. It's renamed to D3 in AG2, And it's actually by harvesting in the global, again renamed, I do the extreme case, to D4 and D5. And then from the outside perspective, if you look to the whole catalog network, then you see actually 5 different data sets. So you have to do a deep inspection to know that this is actually about the same one and to know what it is. And that's the reason why we argue for having this ADMS identifier process, where the plus in the curly bracket says, I have noted it in ADMS identifier as well. We start back again with catalog C, where we have D1 with ADMS identifier D1 in the list. And then aggregated catalog AG1 does the same thing. It might rename and it adds D2 to the ADMS identifier, but maintains D1. Same happens for AG2, but then with D3. And then the harvesting leads to these. On the first glance, of course, we are in the same situation as the undesired behavior. But if we then have a deeper inspection, we have this trace, and we can find D1 back in the global thing, and then we could consider that these two should be merged. And this as well, although it not resolves the, let's say, the public-facing immediate to the end user, that there are only one data set, but it might be still look like there were 4. If you look a bit of a deeper, and it's through the ADMS identifier, you might see as a user that it actually is the same thing. So this is the objective of our proposal with ADMS identifier, that this can become possible. Today, we have no means in our network to do this. We have to be lucky that our colleagues, the colleagues in data catalogs, provide sufficient information to reach this. And we want somehow to, get good neighborhoods that this becomes possible, that you can do this.
Question from Fabian. Fabian?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's very, I say it's very true, and that's exactly what we are doing in Data Europa. But what you're describing is actually provenance information. You want to store the provenance. Where does it come from? How was it named before? What is the original data provider? So it's, for me, it's not, we shouldn't store this in the identifier property. If you want to build this kind of harvesting graph, let's say, maybe we should think about an additional property, or at least use the provenance property, maybe. And I'm not sure, I'm not deep into Prof O if this can be modeled with it, but I guess.
Yeah, I think that's correct, Fabian. That's, in fact, what you're right. We're actually creating a chain of provenance.
Yes.
Now, the thing is, we can do something with provenance and make a proposal for that, which would be, I think, a bigger change, or we can try to do express this with identifiers. And I think this is the proposal that we have, because currently the identifiers don't work that way in the network. But that's basically the choice that you can have. We have a proposal to do that in a simple way through the identifier with the stuff that we already have.
Yeah, that's indeed the proposal, and indeed to say, okay, look, what can you do? Because today with the identifiers, you cannot do anything of this. You cannot reliably get to this, let's say, merging this step. It's very hard. You have to be lucky. No? Yeah. And what our proposal is, let's to make this a bit more formal. That if everybody follows it, it's a little bit effort on your own catalog side to add these ADMS identifiers. But the benefit is that any other catalog that takes your information can decide on, can make these fusion decisions if required. That's the proposal, why we make it in this way.
Any more comments? I don't see any hands raised. I don't see.
Hagar is raised an hand.
Okay, I didn't see that one. So Hagar?
Thanks. Hello. Yeah, no, I just wanted to share maybe a little bit our experience because we make quite extensive use of identifiers. So maybe, as Fabian mentioned, when we moved from the EU Open Data Portal to Data Europa, basically what happened, we used our Rdf about as an identifier, which I think is shared by other catalogs as well. And in that case, what we decided to do was to explicitly map it to DCT identifier. And I think this may be already one indication that could help. I mean, if the Rdf about is actually an identifier and it's managed as such, which is sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. When it's mapped to DCT identifier, then it should fairly be harvested to any aggregate catalog after that. Also, I was the one maybe more skeptic about using and by the way, I see Andres is also in the call. For example, I know JRC, which is a publisher also on Data Europa, they have their own very authoritative identifier that is used. It's also tracked for citation purposes. And in that case, it's possible for us via DCT identifier to manage that and prepare it, for example, for the citation tool we have. So we managed to do that with DCT identifier quite well. The ADMS identifier, we use it specifically for DOIs. And then we can basically, it allows us to assign a priority to which identifier to use, for example, for the citation function. So these are all things that should be kept in mind. However, I'm not so comfortable with, I mean, I understand the desire, but I'm not so comfortable with basically promoting the ADMS identifier to record any identifier because, well, maybe it's because we have used it specifically for external identifiers, so mostly DOIs for datasets. And I'm afraid I can see, I'm a bit suspicious that it might be used improperly in the end. So maybe insisting first on the DCT identifier, which is what we opted for, at least when we moved from when we moved to Data Europa EU, would be a more practical and understandable way of moving forward. So
Can I say that there is a second proposal about DCT identifier that we're going to go into later?
Sorry for jumping in.
I also want to say that the use of ADMS identifier for DOIs is in no way in conflict with this. This is adding this, and the proposal here is that for each of those identifiers, it is absolutely clear what the identifier is and where it came from. So in the case that you're using a DOI, you would actually say in the IDMS identifier the DOI name, and you would say this is being the agency is the DOI agency. So it would actually be clear, and that would be different from an ADMS identifier that is from another agency. So the idea of the metadata of ADMS identifier is that you can use any identifier that you want, but you have to provide information about what it is and where it comes from. You see that? So there is no way, there's no reason that ADMS identifier cannot also be used for these kind of persistent identifiers like DOI, but just this is the proposal for using it with the identifiers that are sort of internal to the various catalogs.
And this will be maintaining the obligation to use the data types from datasets, I imagine.
For example, yeah.
Okay. I mean, this is how it is now, if I'm not wrong, no?
Yeah.
The goal is that's what there's no preference. Let's say with ADMS identifier, and there was actually no statement that it should be only a collection of this kind of that kind. It always has been an open collection of any value. The thing was the original specification, as you see it, with secondary, that was kind of implicitly assuming that the DCT identifier was the main one to be used. and then you come into the game of what is the value of the main one and what is the format and the representation of it. And at this form, so far, we have not been discussing on that. We have no expectations. We only say that for ADMS identifier, use the format you want, the representation you want, but record the agency and share it. That's the only thing that the proposal is about. And the benefit is for everybody. The benefit is that everybody can decide how to do cross-referencing, how to do merging or fusing on it. That's the benefit. So it's actually not changed anything a lot on your local decisions. So if you say I want to use DOIs and only for DOIs I do a nice front end or a widget or something like this, that's still going to be working.
But I think it's correct. I think we should move to the next one because actually people are already referring to DCT identifier. And I think wanted to remind one point that was made by Matthias. He said in the chat, basically what we're trying to do with this proposal is repair things that we might have done wrong at the beginning, where we now have a situation that people are using identifiers in different ways. And therefore this proposal is to create one way that it's absolutely clear which is which. So that I think that's would like to keep that. I think from the discussion so far, there is sort of two groups of people. One that wants to keep the metadata stable, not change anything while you're copying information from one place to the other, and people that say it would be good to add little things that make things clearer. And I think those are the two groups of people that I've heard here, and I think we need to come back to that and see how we come to a conclusion on that point. Bert, if it's okay with you, I think we might move to the second proposal, which is a parallel proposal. That is actually, I think Hagar already mentioned it, of how to use DCT identifier the right way. But then I'll leave that to you, Bert, to come up with that proposal. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. And as a consequence, if you bit connected with the discussion on ADMS identifier and see this as a broad list of identifiers, it comes to the question, what is then the main identifier to be used? This is a label that we have assigned to DCT identifier. And there have been questions upon in GitHub, what do we expect around main identifier? And if we look to our current definition, then there's a bit of main identifier, and usage nodes actually had two options. And last time we discussed on it, and we said there was a blue and a yellow proposal, and it was this blue proposal that got the most attention and most traction. And this is what is here written: to use DCT identifier to indicate the identifier that has been assigned by the publisher or owner, so as close as possible to the first creator of this metadata. So that is that was the interpretation. So what has happened is that there's a lot of motivation for that, but that means that in parallel, in combination with ADMS identifier as a broad list, you can have with this DCT identifier the identifier that you could promote to your readers of the metadata, saying if you want to use it and if you want to refer to it to site or something, use this one preferably. There might be other contexts that you might say, look, use this one or that, but this is kind of what the publisher, the owner of the data set, has said and indicated, use by preference this one. As a consequence of that, of course, things can coincide much more easily and more simpler, and you get somehow this kind of shortcut to the original identifier. It's another formulation of it. If we look to it, if we follow this proposal, then we maintain the label main identifier, DCT identifies URI, the range is still literal, but the cardinality becomes not n anymore, but 1. because if you say that this is the one assigned and expressed by the owner and the publisher, then you could say this is the single one, the one that you preferably use. And then as a communication, please use a persistent identifier. And so the form, although we don't say this, it has to be this format, this representation, let's say the suggestion, the highly recommendation is use a persistent identifier. And that makes this proposal as well coherent with the story of ADMS identifier.
Andrea?
Yeah, so I think that probably the definition should be a bit clearer, because just reading it without the context, you can also read it as, yes, this is assigned by anybody who is publishing this data set. So I have my own data set published in my catalog, and then the European Data Portal published it, and is a publisher as well, so it assigns the identifier. So I think the definition should be clearer about the fact that this is assigned by the original publisher of the data set, which is not necessarily the owner. And then what happens when it is harvested through other catalogs? So if there is, then you should not add any DCT identifier. Otherwise, what happens? Because
But
otherwise,
that's the proposal, yes. I think what you're saying, yeah, you want to remove the ambiguity in the usage note.
I think the ambiguity should be removed completely. If this is the identifier assigned by the original publisher of the dataset, this should be made a bit clearer, because otherwise it's open to misinterpretation.
And I see Anders actually making the same comment in the chat, so I think that's taken.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, that's the objective. Of course, this if there are any other things there's a bit of impact here. This is a semantic change, yeah. So this change is removing, if you see at the bottom here, where the usage node, original usage node says this contains the main identifier for the dataset. For instance, the URI or other unique identifier in the context of the catalog. That could be the one assigned by the catalog. That is not the purpose. So the purpose is here, the semantic change is, it is assigned by the original creator, maintainer of the dataset. So this is the reason why it's a semantic change. That we eliminate this option of that the catalog assignee is, it becomes that, but it becomes uniform in our catalog network. So that's the advantage of doing this, that we don't have these two options into it anymore, that we have a single option into it. Note that if you start reading strictly the usage notes, use a highly recommended persistent identifier assigned by the publisher, the original publisher, then you could say there must be one. That's not something that we have proposed yet, so we still leave it open to keep the current practice where sometimes this is not being filled in, although this is not recommended at all by us. So here we are a bit of open still, more open to keep the current practice, to not close the door entirely immediately, but do it a slow way. So that is the proposal in addition to it, to ADMS identifier.
I have two comments from Ludger. First of all, he says he doesn't understand why this second change has more impact, because in the first change we're adding stuff, mandatory stuff. And he also says the first change makes every existing use of ADMS identifier invalid. I think that second comment from Ludger, I think, is not true. I think all the current usage of ADMS identifier would remain completely valid.
How? If the ADMS identifier has to have a second and fourth agent, for example, and they don't have it at the moment, so...
We're not talking about agent at the moment. We're talking about datasets.
Yeah,
You mean additional metadata? You mean that there
Yes.
should be additional metadata? But I don't think, why should that be a problem? Because if you have assigned it, if somebody creates and assigns an identifier and you put it in ADMS identifier, then you should know who is the creator in some way, at least in a textual way. It has been created by this system, or in the context of this editor. I don't see where this is a problem.
Well, it could be that if people have assigned ADMS identifiers without metadata, only with a SCOS notation, then indeed their implementation would not be in compliance. I think that's clear. That's clear. So we need to take that into account in seeing how we scope and define the metadata for ADMS identifier so that current implementations do not get rejected. I think it's good point. The other point of Ludger, I think the first change on the ADMS identifier, we're adding things. And in the second change, we're actually are facing a situation where people have interpreted the specification of DCT identifier in different ways. So in that sense, if people have used the other implementation, namely the identifier in the context of the catalog itself, then they might need to change. So that the change in the second case is more disruptive because people would have to change their ways.
Yes, if you do the first change backward compatible, I understand. Then I completely agree. Okay. But how you propose it, it's not backward compatible. So
we need to
it would be a similar range of changes.
Yeah, so in the first case, instead of having mandatory metadata fields for ADMS identifier, we would argue that if you provide that information, it's going to be more useful than if you don't. I think that would be a case of how to present the proposal, but I see your point, and we're going to make that clear. And I see if Ludger agrees. Any other comments, things that you wanted to add, Bert, to what you just said?
No, this is all of it. I see Matthias has raised his hand.
I have a question. It said that DCT identifier would be unique within the in the catalog, so it's not globally unique. Is that it?
The original, the current as it is in the current specification, allows the case that you use DCT identifier to use it as the identifier that you use within the catalog. So that means that if you harvest your two sources, that you would replace DCT identifier with the value that you use in the catalog.
But maybe that's in response to Matthias. Would it be useful, Matthias, if the usage note or the definition in the previous page, Bert?
Yeah, sorry.
The previous say that it should be globally unique.
Would be better. Yeah. Another option would be to provide an identifier on the catalog level or something that could be used that is globally unique and combined with the dataset identifier to create something uniquely. Otherwise,
it would probably be better to say that that should be globally unique.
And in that case, I would argue we should use the URI of the dataset as the identifier.
Yeah, but that's the question that I think we come back to later also when we talk about Rdf identifiers. But I think your point was that to make this work, that DCT identifier should be globally unique. I think we probably want to put that also in the usage note.
Yeah, I don't see the use of it otherwise.
No,
since we cannot create
and it wouldn't work. Unique. It wouldn't work if it's not unique. Then you can't actually refer it back. You're correct. Okay.
Yeah, the globe, of course. If you want to share it across in the catalog network, this globally aspect becomes a part of it. That's unfortunately not always the case that people have done the practice.
But in this proposal, I think it makes sense to make that explicit.
Yeah.
We would expect that to be a globally unique persistent identifier.
Yeah.
And I see Philip Ashlock also supports that.
Okay, good. Any other comments? If not, so that would be this in addition. Now, if we look, and then I take the perspective, because we have not yet done this, what happens if we look to Rdf as the format to share the data? What is the impact on that? Why I'm doing this is because not necessarily everybody is doing and using Rdf, but Rdf is mostly used and has certain expectations with regard to identifiers. So what is, we all are familiar, I think, around with Rdf, but we have explicit named nodes in the form of a URI, or blank nodes where there's no identifier assigned to this entity. And implicitly, we assume that the URI that is assigned in a named node is persistent, stable, and dereferenceable. So a highly quality identifier. Not always the case, but this is somehow what is being assumed. And what happens is, of course, if we process and if we do some operations with Rdf, then normally we expect that named nodes are not changed name, that just maintain the name, but blank nodes might need to change names. That is in the processing, the normal behavior. And in particular, if we simulate merging of two Rdf files, then what happens is that if you have the same name node, the same URI in the two files, and you bring them together, that the information is fused together. Rdf does this automatically for you. Whereas if you do two blank nodes, you cannot do that. So you have to treat them as separate entities and split them. So what happens is that if you have this with a URI, and this is the case what Matthias already mentioned, if the URI is D1, then you can harvest and you get a URI dataset with D1. D1 is same for aggregated 2, and if you merge them, if there are two Rdf files, AG1 and AG2, then they automatically get us into the situation there's only one node, named node with D1. This is the natural case from Rdf. However, if you do this with blank nodes, you get this situation, the undesired situation. So this is then you have to find other mechanisms to say that these things are the same. And this, in this case, Dms Identifier or metadata about this blank node might aid us to facilitate with that. Now, and this is something that we cannot force, and this is very hard to enforce and to know. If you use Rdf exchanges and you have named nodes, then consider them as persistent identifiers. That's the advice I would like to propose, that this is the happening and that we treat them in this way. So that they are persistent, stable, and that the natural merging happens. If you change the URIs, if you do adopt and you treat them as blank nodes, in some way you will enter in the undesired situation. You contribute to that. This makes it, we cannot see from the outside on the Rdf, on the URI, how you have treated it. So try to, and this is the guideline then, to use it and to think in the way this is a persistent identifier and maintain it. And nevertheless, and this is the consequence, because not everything will have a persistent URI as named node, we should consider this post-processing ability and to facilitate for that, and that coming back to our ADMS identifier proposal to facilitate that this is possible, this post-processing, so that you still can, in the case that it's unclear, to do this and to do this merging. So this is kind of the best of both worlds. On one hand is a warning or an identification of towards using Rdf named nodes with persistent URIs and not as blank nodes to treat that. On the other hand, still to facilitate the need to deal with this post-processing. Matthias?
So I just want to emphasize that blank nodes is okay for some positions in the RDF graph, like time period or the identifier, Dms identifier with a big I, etc. So it's only the main classes that should be URIs according to the DCAT-2 specification, the recommendation there.
Yes.
So we should have the same recommendation in DCAT-AP too.
Yes.
Yeah, indeed, I agree. Yeah, this is so
But that would of course only work for cases where people use RDF, but that is implied here.
Yeah, this is the RDF case. This is the RDF case.
Okay.
I saw a note for Sander. I don't know if this is relevant. Just
it's basically also supporting the fact that we shouldn't use blank nodes for datasets.
Okay.
Because it all makes it very more difficult. Okay.
Okay. So no further comments on it. But this is the RDF perspective. And then our last open question is to which entities we want to apply, would like to apply this. As initially mentioned, in the story, I always use now datasets as the wording, and examples are all around datasets. We consider that data service is in the same area. So we would like to apply at least a minimal the recommendations and the guidelines to dataset and data service. And now we would like to see if this is on your side as well required, needed, advisable for other classes where we think on distribution and agent and catalog records as the elements. Because these are as well raised throughout in the GitHub issue. So you see 141 is a question about agent identifiers. So the question is, will we apply this to other entities too or not?
Any comments there?
I have a comment. Definitely use it for URIs for distributions, agents, and the catalog. It creates a lot of problems when you get duplicates of agents. And also a sensible approach, if you have a catalog you're harvesting that uses blank nodes, there are definitely ways to address that by generating URN::U IDs, for instance, by doing an MD5 sum of the maybe of the title or something that seems to be stable. You should not use the blank node ID since it's changing, but other things have a semi-stable character that you can use.
Okay, so I think so, Matthias, that's clear. There are all other things that you can do to detect duplicates that are not based on identifiers, but based on other parts of the metadata. That's clear. And you say also for agents, I see Jesper also saying to see identity for agents, and he says distributions as blank nodes are okay. That's something that I think is open for discussion. And Stig in Norway says that columnization is also possible to create URIs for blank nodes. That's correct, isn't that, Steve?
Yeah, you can do columnization, but that you have to treat them as blank nodes. You cannot trust. Yeah. So every harvesting, every approach, you might have to take that into account.
And Sander says it should apply to resource. Well, we don't in DCAT-AP, we don't have resource as a explicit class, but in DCAT, indeed, identifier applies to resources which are datasets and data services. So the proposal here is to indeed apply it to dataset and data service, which both are DCAT resources. Yeah.
I have just one. Can you hear me?
Fabian, yes.
Just one remark to data service. Since there are still two major use cases for data service as part of distribution and part of catalog. So for the data services which are part of distributions, we would not recommend to use URI, but use it as a blank node because it has only very limited properties and itself standalone with a URI, it makes no sense to us.
Mm-hmm. But the other one where
the other one, which is still for us at least under development, would make sense because then they're on the same level like datasets.
That's a first-class citizen in that sense.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So for distribution, there are sort of two views on that.
Yeah, they're just part of the distribution, and it's at least we are not doing it right now. But we assign URIs for datasets, catalogs, distributions, and so on, but not for the embedded services.
Any more comments? So one thing that I think that comes through the discussions that we have today is that we also need to look a little bit more in detail in sort of the implementation plan. So what kind of timeline we would envisage for the proposals. And I think that is something that everybody who has seen the proposal would need to come back and see how and in what time frame these proposals can be implemented. Bert, what is your view on that part?
Okay, now a bit of on the assessment on how people feel, because in the first part of the discussion of the proposal on ADMS identifier, I felt that it was that the work group around the table here was feeling it as more invasive than I had expected. So that it would require much more changes than I personally would expect it.
But there were sort of two groups of people. I think there was a group of people said, yes, this is a good way to repair the things that have gone wrong. But there is also a group that says, well, maybe we should not bother with this repairing and just go for the proposal with DCT identifier and the Rdf identifiers. But that is, I think, two groups of people. I think in general, people think it's a reasonable proposal, but some people think that it might be not a good idea to put big effort in implementing the ADMS identifier. I don't know if people share that feeling. How could we do that? Could we have a discussion on GitHub or later on to see how people would want to see that implemented? I think the proposal was clear. I think that was people understand after the explanation and after the example what the idea is. But the question is now, how do we implement that? And when do we implement that? Yeah. And some people would argue we don't want to implement it. And that is, I think, the discussion that we might need to have. Matthias?
I still would like to have a discussion about what happens when you change the URI and you break links. You have references between datasets. Sure, you can probably treat them the referential integrity within one data catalog, but I mean it's not impossible that you reference datasets across catalogs.
Yeah.
This is similar to another dataset, and if you change the URIs, you will break this.
So what you say, there's a need for a discussion of what to do with the use of identifiers in relationships.
Yes, so is this not an interesting case? Do we not consider this at all? Or I mean, we will break things if we change the URIs, but maybe these properties are very seldomly used, and then we should acknowledge this, and then maybe they should even be removed then, if we don't see that there is relations between datasets.
But that's correct. That's a different discussion, but we put that on the list of further consideration. I have Jesper and Ludger on my list of.
I don't see the problem with the breaking links because I add another URL. The original URL is still existing, but it points to the original data set or the original catalog, and I assign a new URL. And this new method of having different or multiple ADMS identifiers allows a user to detect that the two URLs point to the same data set, or to a similar. It's the same data set, but maybe I've added some information, or I've added a distribution, but it's still the same. Still the same data set, and you can use the ADMS identifier to detect it's the same data set, although it has two or more URIs.
But I think we need to sort of think a little bit more about the use of identifiers in referencing. And I think that is something that we need to do. Ludger, you had your hand up? Or you put it back down?
Thank you.
No. Okay.
I just wanted to say again that my main worry about the first change was that it's not backward compatible, and that it would take a long time to get our data providers to provide this data. And for years, we would be not DCAT-AP compliant, and I would really not like this. But since you said you will make it backward compatible and it would be necessary if you want to do it in a small change, so I have no big problems with that. So it's additional information. It would be nice to collect it, of course. And the second one is pretty close to how we use it already. We already at DCAT-AP DE, we already say that if you have a DCT identifier from the dataset you are collecting, you should not change it, and you should only add your own identifiers to ADMS identifiers. So this is very close to the way we already do it.
Okay, that's good.
Hagar is making a suggestion. Hagar?
To use all same as. We can look at that, yeah. We can see if we can make a recommendation of using all same as. All same as, if I understand, is a little dangerous. I understand the discussion that I've seen all same as, that it might have implications that you don't want, but we need to look at that, but it's a suggestion that we can take into account.
It's not a problem if what you're actually talking about is the same thing. The dataset just have another URI. If you're trying to do something to say like a web page, a wiki page is the same thing as a dataset, then you are in big trouble.
Okay.
And this is the point where it's not always clear what is the outcome, and the decision might be different from catalog to catalog to consider things the same. There might be different interpretations of what is same as. So just on the referential integrity, that was a topic that came into my mind as well when writing the proposal. I didn't put it up because it's a complicated additional discussion, and I wanted to settle first this proposal before making examples where this would be a story or would be a challenge, etc., and how this proposal could help or not help.
Okay.
Sander, yeah. Go ahead.
Sander, you can speak. His microphone is on, but I can't hear him. Sander? Oh, I think something's wrong with his voice.
Yeah, because he wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, I see his hand is up, but otherwise, if you have no voice, Sander, you can put it in the chat. No, I don't see that. So let's then move on. I think we have clearly also a discussion about implementation and someone said, let's discuss that on GitHub. So we'll move that discussion there, and then go ahead, Bert, with the wrap up.
Yeah, I think one of the proposals and discussion that we have is the first topic is we had no discussion on actual representation of the identifier, which is actually very good because we can handle any identifier. So this is very good. As a side effect due to this, we have no enforcement of the use of percentage identifiers. It is still highly recommended, but if we would enforce it, we would start discussing on how it should be represented and what the other expectations on that. So I think these two are kind of still slowly and good proposals for us that we have this good discussion on that. Overall, I think our proposal is beneficial to the catalog network and not complicating too much the catalog implementations themselves. And it works for Rdf format exchange as non-Rdf format exchange, and it's broadly applicable. So I think this is kind of the summary of the discussion of the proposal, what you can see in that we have been doing. We originally thought of releasing this in a two-phase, where the first part on ADMS identifier would be part of a bug fix release. Now, if we see in the discussion outcome, it will be, let's have a discussion and to formalize and have you good public review on the guidelines. So Alexandra, maybe you can share it again, the link. If not, you will find it in the GitHub issue as well. So the most recent GitHub issue on identifiers has a link too. Please comment, address any topics, any challenges that you see. And our original planning was during May to have a discussion on it and then to have a finalized release of a consolidated document in June to release it as a bug, together with a bug fix release of 2.1. But let's see what is the comments in the GitHub, if this will be part and what part will be part of the bug fix release. But anyhow, it's already for you to consult, to apply, and to see what is the impact on your catalog or part of the catalog network that you are maintaining.
Okay. I see there was a serious point from Sander that he says that the proposal of ADMS identifier requires them to make changes to the metadata. And I think we need to think about that, Bert, of how to formulate that, because I don't think we're saying that people must do this. We're just saying that if people do this, then we have additional possibilities to create this functionality of being able to detect duplicates using ADMS identifier. If there are publishers who do not do this, then the situation remains as it is, and we don't have any benefits. But I don't think we're going to force publishers to create these ADMS identifiers if they don't want to. So I think we need to be clear about that, what we will expect. The thing is, if people do this, then there is a beneficial effect. If people don't do it, we don't have beneficial effects. But that is, I think, the situation that we're in. I think we need to be clear about that.
Yeah, so in the cardinality, indeed, if you scroll back to the slides, you will see that the cardinality of ADMS identifier stays on 0 to n.
No, I think that's not the question. The question is adding ADMS identifiers.
Right.
People are worried about that. The proposal says you need to put extra things in metadata, and I think that we're not saying that people must do this. The only thing is that if people do this, then we have a certain benefit.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I can formulate it less strict in that in the recommendation, but the benefit in it, if too few people of too few catalogs do this, then
there's no benefit.
There's no benefit. Then it's very it's when we collectively do it, then we get the benefit.
But let's make sure that we formulate it in that way that it's sort of encouraging people to do it, but it's up to the publishers and the aggregators to actually follow that proposal. But I think that is the way that we work with the group as well. We're not making those enforcements at this point, but we're just trying to convince people that it would be useful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's indeed the goal. So that's the highlight of that.
That answers, I think, Fabian's point here. Okay. Any other points that we have? I think it was the last slide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was it.
Matthias, I think that your point there is you keep the URIs, then is equally valid, valued approach, or even preferred. But that is, as we said earlier, we're trying to repair things, and that is one of the proposals that we have. So we'll make sure that we try to formulate the proposals in the right way in the new version, and I think that is then also open to discussion in the group on GitHub. Pavlina, you want to do I think we have everything. We have responded to most of the questions and the chat. Of course, the chat, we'll have the chat, and we'll take care of any comments that we've missed during the meeting. And then Pavlina, I'll hand over back to you.
Yes, I'd like to thank all participants for this fruitful exchange of ideas and the comments because it's very useful for us to reformulate the way we are perceiving several things, and it's very useful for us to receive your comments from the actual use of DCAT-AP. Definitely we need to reformulate our proposals in order to make it clear. We will put our proposal into GitHub, and we will give enough time for your comments. And then we will step back a bit and consider how we will treat those comments, and based on the comments that we'll receive, even if we need a third webinar to decide on them, if it goes beyond bug fix release, and then it's something more. But we need to position ourselves in a more clear way to base also from your feedback. And I don't know, I would like to ask if you need something more from our side, apart from stating in a clear way what we want, what we are proposing, and put things into GitHub. I know. Do you need something from our side more? I don't think so. I hope, but please go ahead. So, from my side, I would like to thank you all, and we looking forward for your feedback and collaboration. Max?
Okay, thank you, everybody, and we'll be back. The proposal is already on GitHub. So if you have any comments, then you can create issues there that we can discuss. And I think Paulina said it all. If there is in the comments room for having another webinar, then we'll start planning that. So for the time being, I think we have had very good participation, very good comments, very good contributions, and I think that was a good meeting today. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank Brett for presenting the proposals. And Alberta, good typing. And
sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay,
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
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 And thank you, everybody, and hopefully to see you on GitHub.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Sure.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.